Hello, designers. This is Mr. Granlund here, coming to you live from Mr. Granlund Studios. I wanted to cover a couple of things. I've been noticing students, you've been turning in your projects, but there have been some missing fundamental components to making a good picture. And so I wanted to cover those in a short video and try and talk about them to you. The first thing that a good picture needs, and every good picture needs, is a foreground, middle ground, and background. All that's simply saying is that the entire picture is filled with things that are in front of your main subject, on the same plane as your main subject, and behind your main subject as well. So, for instance, we can tell that the floor is closer to us because the line's going in the distance, and we understand how perspective works a little bit, just naturally. We also can tell by overlapping. So, for instance, we can tell that my daughter, Julia, and I, we're in front of these chairs here because we're overlapping and I cover over it. We can also tell that I'm closer to the camera because these things are out of focus and we're in focus. And so we want to make sure we have these things, So this is the foreground down here. This is kind of our middle ground here. And then back here, this is the background. Okay, the ceiling, the walls. And it's not just like unnecessary space. It's important to have that in there, otherwise our picture won't feel complete. I've noticed that some of you have turned in your pictures and you don't have foreground, middle ground, or background, which means your picture is incomplete and you should redo it. Now the second thing I want to talk about is overlapping. Overlapping is when you have shapes that, overlap. So I can't see part of this chair here because this chair is in front of it, right? They're overlapping. I can't see these chairs back here because they're overlapping, or I'm overlapping it. I can't see the curtains. And this is a natural thing. Things overlap in pictures all the time. And it's important that we have that in our picture. Sometimes what young designers want to do is they want to isolate things. So they'll draw like their favorite food over here, which might be pizza. Okay? And that'll be all the way away from a soccer ball because they like soccer. That's apparently a soccer ball. Okay? But in the natural world, if we look at things through like a camera lens, we would see, maybe we have a soccer ball and it's overlapping the pizza behind it. So it's almost like the pizza goes behind the soccer ball, okay? And also things come in from the edge, like this chair over here. You don't see the entire edge. It gets cut off, and that happens in pictures all the time too. So if you have everything inside the middle of your picture, it looks really funny. So sometimes taking some of those objects that are going to represent yourself, shoving them off the edge so they kind of get cut off, actually make it a better picture. Now the last thing I want to show you is rule of thirds. To help me demonstrate this, I'm going to continue using this awesome photograph by Mr. Bass of myself, my daughter. And I'm going to use the crop tool here. Now in the crop tool, there's this cool function where it says rule of thirds. And what that does is if I drag out a window, it gives me this kind of tic-tac-toe board. And what we really want in a nice picture is we want those tic-tac-toe boards to cross in a part where there's a meaningful subject. So it'd be really cool if I could have it so my daughter is kind of on one crossing line and I'm on the other. Now this is good. Sometimes what we want to do as young designers is kind of stick herself in the center like that. And the problem with that is it makes the project kind of dull. So if you just kind of shove things over a little bit and realign it so that's kind of shoved towards the edge of the page, towards the top of the page, whatever your main subject is, it's going to look a lot better. Now our last thing that's going to help is context. Now I tried to describe these in videos that you'd watched earlier, but it seems like you did not, many of you who turned in your projects did not apply the learning in those videos towards your own projects. And so even if you have turned it in, I want you to go back and go through this project again. Now context is a little bit tricky, but it's not very difficult. So I'm going to take one of these objects. So I'm going to cut that object out, and that object out. And I'm going to create some foreground, middle ground, and background by just copying part of that layer. And now I'm walking my daughter through downtown Minneapolis, or St. Paul actually. I'm going to move us up here. Oh, such a happy family. And I'm not just sticking myself in the center, I'm just kind of shoving myself off to the right a little bit. And now I'm going to open up one of these pictures that represents an aspect of my character. So this is a sculpture by my grandpa, Paul Granlund. He's a very famous sculptor. This, the life-size sculpture is actually at the governor's mansion in St. Paul. You can go take a picture with it if you want, and I'll even give you a couple of extra credit points for your effort. But I'm going to select this out. I'm going to try my new favorite tool, the object selection tool. Oh, so close. So what's happening here is the artificial intelligence isn't picking up on the edges so good. And so what I'm going to have to do is zoom in and do some of this by hand. And I like to use a series of tools. I'm going to pause it here and come back when I've selected it out. Alright, welcome back, and I have selected it out. I'm going to click my layer mask button, and so that cuts it out nicely for me. Ooh, I could clean that up better. It's always good to do the best selections possible. Good selections make the difference. You know, like this right here, having that kind of jagged edge doesn't look very good. So even though I'm actually removing some of the sculpture, cutting into it a little bit actually makes the overall selection look better and cleaner. Okay, so context. Getting back to our original thought of context here, when I put this picture in to my scene, I want it to be noticeable, but kind of the right amount of noticeable. And I also wanted to make it look like it fits with everything else that's in the scene. I want the colors to kind of match. And so I'm actually going to teach you kind of 2 tricks for this. So here's my sculpture. My first trick is to cut out part of your background and use it as your foreground. That's the first trick. Then just kind of stick it behind it, and it kind of looks like it's in there, even though the scale is kind of like all off. The other quick trick is the drop shadow. So just make a layer. It's going to be hard to see this. Make a layer, and I'm going to use a big brush. Oh, it's got to be a soft brush. Now again, this same tutorial was on videos that I showed earlier. So I made a new layer, Control T. And now I have a drop shadow, so it looks like it's actually in that scene. And if I want it to look like it's hovering, I can separate it so now it looks like it's floating. Even though context is kind of weird, it's still a good context. The last thing that you can do to help with the context is provide color over the whole thing. There's lots of ways to do this. Well, one of the easiest ways to do it is to go to your 50-50 circle here, and you can do either a solid color or a gradient. I kind of like gradients, and I'll choose, maybe I'll do blues this time, and then under where it says normal, I'm going to change this from normal to one of these overlays, or maybe this color option here, and bring down the opacity. And what this does is it lights everything with a little bit of a blue light so that it looks like it fits together a lot better, and that provides context. Okay, so there's some helpful tips to making a solid picture. Make sure you have foreground, middle ground, background. Overlap your objects, like how this is going behind me and behind these trees. Use your rule of thirds. Don't keep your subject in the dead center, and then try to provide some context for each object that's in there. A little drop shadow, maybe a little coloring, just so everything feels like it belongs. All right, I wish you the best of luck, and I look forward to those resubmissions.